what we will give people who work with us. These are all the things that we can take. And I will pause to let you guys look at that list and see if you have any questions about that.
What exactly do you mean by oils?
Oil, like fats, oils, and spices. So like if you had a thing of olive oil, I mean you could put the olive oil in there, or if you're cooking something and there's like leftover oils and greases from your frying pan, put that in our totes too. Obviously probably let it cool down first because you don't want to melt the stuff that you have in our melt the containers that you're using.
There's like a million kinds of oils.
There is a million kinds of oils, yeah, that's true. We're not taking crude oil in our totes, that's for sure. So the biggest thing that we can't take that people often think maybe we can is on this list is at the top, yard waste, like leaves and grass. The reason we can't do that is because oftentimes people will treat their yards with chemicals and fertilizers and stuff, and that can mess up the chemical balance inside the digesters, and that can be harmful for that. Things like cat litter too, I guess, make it on the list. Now, at the bottom you can see cardboard that does not contain food products, because we can take, like I said earlier, we can take like a box of cereal if the box of cereal has food waste in it. But if it's just the empty box, it's not doing anybody any good for us to take. And it's much better to actively recycle that box in a proper recycling facility as opposed to giving it to us. So, something I will also point out, it's always better in terms of packaging and disposable ware versus like a metal fork. It's always better to not use single-use items. It's always better to use reusable items in every instance than to use even compostable packaging or single-use items. So it's always, 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 always better for schools, restaurants, you know, whoever, yourselves, to use reusable items as opposed to single-use. Because the production, when you think about these sorts of things too, like it's not just throwing the fork in the landfill, the plastic fork in the landfill, that becomes an issue, right? It's like, what did it take to make the plastic fork? What resources were required to make that? How did they get those resources? Where did they come from? You know, so there's those sorts of things to think about. But this is a lovely picture of our depackaging machine. It looks absolutely delightful, and it smells great. Like I said, so in this machine, you can see on one side, that's all papery material on the right-hand side, and the red bin, I don't know what to call that necessarily, but that's all like papery fibrous material. That is what is not usable for us will get sent elsewhere, and then we will take what's left and that gets turned into the bedding that you have over there. And then the food waste that was in that packaging gets put into our digesters onto our tipping floor. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a picture of the tipping floor, which is just where all the food waste waits to get into the digesters. It would have been a pretty good visual. I'm sorry, I couldn't find one. What's up?
How does it sort food from crap?
Well, you know, that's a good question, and I was not given a great explanation other than basically the food waste gets turned into a liquid. As you can see in that picture right there, I wish I had a zoom option for this, but the picture, you can see the liquidy stuff. So the liquidy stuff is what gets through more often than like it's not really a good example of that, but you can see there's some like papery green material in there. That sort of stuff is not going to make it through the filters that are in the depackaging machine, and so they will get separated out. There's layers and layers to the depack. I only have the top-down view. I wish I could have gotten like a side view so you could have seen the depth of the depackaging machine, but I did not get one, sadly to me. But that's a great question. Like, how does it separate out? It's not run by like lasers determining what is food waste and what is not. It is a very mechanical process as opposed to more of a engineered process of like electronic. Yeah. Okay. Now, compostable ware is a question that I get a lot. I get it all the time. Like, what about compostable plates and compostable forks? And the answer is yes, compostable stuff is a good idea. I like it a lot. But it doesn't always mean that it's better for the environment. And there is some people say that the life cycle of creating a compostable fork, for example, is more costly than a plastic fork. Now, with compostables being a newer field, the data isn't super complete, I would say, but it's something to think about, right? Because anytime you make a product, you have to think about what goes into making that product and how we got to that point, like what resources were got and then brought to the factory and then turned into the product and shipped the product to the place that it was going. So because of that, compostable ware, a good idea, and I don't dislike it, but I'm not entirely sold that it is automatically better. It doesn't always mean that it's better. So just, we have to be mindful of that. And like I said earlier, it's always better to use reusable items and recycle things that are recyclable. So when you can recycle like a plastic or a cardboard box, do that. Much better than throwing it in the trash or trying to give it to us. Yeah, so there's those things. That's a bigger example of the bedding for the dairy cows. I obviously couldn't bring that in, but I wanted to bring a little bit. But it's that. Okay, so I mentioned earlier the food waste hierarchy by the EPA. And as you can see, we are the fourth thing down on that list. So something we talk about a lot with all of our clients is source reduction and reusing things. If you can use products in different ways, so ugly vegetables or ugly fruits that maybe aren't so appealing, use those in your prepared foods section, or try to find a way that isn't going to have it so it gets sitting on a shelf and then just sitting on a shelf, sitting on a shelf, and then it goes back, because that's not going to help anybody. And that leads into our next feeding your community. So we work with, every time we go into a grocery store, for example, we have an emphasis to them that if there's people you can feed with the food that you have, please do that. If it is still edible, we would rather you give it to somebody who needs it. So we work with whoever we're working with. We try to make sure that we have donation partners set up so they can feed hungry humans before it gets to us. So we consider that a value that is far superior to what we do. Feeding people is way more important than taking food that's still edible and throwing it in the trash and giving it to us. You can say the same thing about animals. Obviously, if an animal can eat it, probably better for the animal to have it necessarily than us. And that's why we land on the fourth thing, because we are a safety net to keep food waste out of the trash and making sure that whatever is happening with that food and that food waste gets put into a place where it is getting the most use out of that food that we've produced, that we don't want to use more resources to produce more of if we don't have to. So, and then composting is next, and then incineration and landfill, we obviously want to avoid that as much as humanly possible. So, there we are. That's the anaerobic digestion process. And there's a couple of different ways you can have an anaerobic digester. There's ones at water treatment facilities, but we are not that. We are partnered with a farm. I don't have any examples of water treatment facility digesters. They can take slightly different stuff than we can versus what we take, but there's options. There's different digesters in different facilities. Okay. So these are the quick hit numbers. We run about 50 different truck routes through New England today, and that's including past New England as well. That's probably from Maine to, Maryland is now our most recent place that we've entered into, and Virginia a little bit, New York again. We dispose of 3 million tons of food waste a week, about 3,100 homes. But the biggest thing that we do is nothing that gets sent to us is ever sent to a landfill. It's either sent to a recycling facility or it's turned into energy, bedding, digestate, etc. Nothing that gets sent to us gets sent to a landfill. And I think this is a really great quote. The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else is going to save it or will save it. And I think that that's an important note to remember, especially for me, because the climate crisis is a little scary, it's a little terrifying, but it all starts at an individual level, right? Nobody expects you to solve every problem, nobody expects you to solve every conceivable issue when it comes to the environment, but when you think about yourself and you're like, all right, do I really need that extra thing from the grocery store, or can I not take that, or can I start a compost at my house, or do we have a town drop-off in Westbrook for people to bring their compost to? Because we do that in places like Brunswick, for example. I know we have one in Auburn, I believe, too. For examples in Maine. So there's tangible things that you can do for yourself, be it using reusable items or being a little more thoughtful about what you buy at a grocery store. Not to say that you're not necessarily, but you know, when you go to a grocery store and you plan your meals, or you plan what you're going to eat that day or that week, those are just some tangible small steps that you can take. And downstairs at the cafeteria, when you're looking at those green tote bins where you're dumping out your food waste, making sure that, all right, is this like not, don't throw your apple in the trash can, throw it 2 things over into the green tote bin and give it to us instead. So.